Hey guys, what's up? This is Greg with Britzer Productions here in Kansas City. Today I wanted to shoot this video for a couple of reasons. I was working on all my gear, doing some setup for some shows I got coming up, just doing some rigging and making sure all my gear is in working condition and doing some tune-up on cabling. So I had all my gear out and I basically decided while I have it out to go ahead and do a video. I've been looking a lot around on YouTube and reading forums. I do that a lot when I get bored. And I've basically been seeing there's a lot of people out there making videos of how to do things with audio and setting up gear, running gear, how to mix, how to use a comp, how to use a gate, stuff like that. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. Some people have it right, but they always don't show you every step of the way, and it kind of just confuses people. So what I wanted to do is throw together a basic audio 101 video. I'm going to go over some of the very basic stuff on how to set up and build a larger PA system. Many bands just use a little powered mixer with a couple of speakers on stands, and that's fine if that's the application you're using and maybe you just want to run your vocals through your PA. But maybe if you're a audio guy starting out and want to get into the business of trying to work with some bands and building a nice size PA that you can use for pretty good sized venues or bars, or you're a band and you want to buy a bigger system to expand from just a simple little powered mixer, this video is definitely for you. If you know a lot of advanced audio, you probably won't get much out of this video other than maybe the entertainment value of watching it, and maybe you'll learn something you didn't, or maybe you already know everything I'm going to show you. So the basics of this video, I'm going to go over three basic parts. Basically, I'm going to use my simple rig that I have, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the audio philosophy and real world situations behind that, what I have, and the brand that I use, and I'll kind of explain some of that. And I'm going to show you basically what every piece of gear does. And the second part, I'm going to go over how to properly hook up all the gear. A lot of people don't know properly how to hook up an equalizer. They don't know proper signal chain and signal flow. So I'm going to go over that. And then third, I'm going to go over some other tips and trades of how to properly tune and run a PA system, just basic mixer operation for people that might not be familiar with all the actual stages of a mixer, from the preamp all the way to the fader. A lot of people don't know. They just kind of guess, and they watch some other videos on what to do, but I'm going to show you properly kind of how to work a simple setup, and also show you some other little neat tricks on how to make stuff faster. I've done another video on streamlining your gear. This video, you'll see every single thing that I built in that video being used and kind of how it works. And you'll see some other ways to set up your gear that you might take away from and be able to use it and think, oh well, that's a cool idea, how to hook something up, or how to make your job go a little bit easier, a little bit faster. So you may be wondering, I talked about all the other videos out there. How does this guy know what's right, and everyone else might be wrong, or somebody else might be right? So just to show you, kind of give you a brief history of me, and so you know that what I'm telling you is correct. Kind of my background and my resume, so to say, I guess you could call it. I've been doing audio since I was about 13. I started in high school, and doing theater and stuff like that. Got out of high school, went to the Marine Corps for 5 years, did a little thing on my own doing that. I got back, started going to college. I took some college classes while I was out there and continued doing audio while I was in the Marine Corps. And after I got out of the Marine Corps, I got a degree in audio engineering, and I've been working at a professional venue for about 2 years now. It's a pro concert venue based out of one of our casinos here in Kansas City. Some of the bands I've worked with in the past 2 years have been the Deftones, Seven Dust, Drowning Pool. I have Puddle of Mudd coming up next weekend. I've worked with rap artists like Snoop Dogg, Lil' Kim, Bone Thugs and Harmony, R&B artists like Silk, Casey and JoJo, Urban Mystic, some other kind of guys from the 90s and stuff, or smaller venues who don't get a lot of mainstream bands. I just had Macy Gray. I've done some work with some other comedians like Bob Saget, Stephen Lynch. I have Eddie Griffin coming up. We have Rob Schneider coming up. So we do a lot of pretty big name artists. Some of those shows I was just a system tech for, which means you're just helping their engineers set up. But some of those shows I actually ran monitors, or I ran front of house for some of those artists. So I basically I spend 40 hours a week in a professional venue with $1 million sound system and another $1 million in a lighting system. So basically, that's what I do for a living. So you can know that the information I'm telling you is going to be correct. So I'll start off with the first section of this video and we'll get rolling. Okay, so this first part of the video, I'm going to go over just all the basic items you need to build a decent sized sound system. And I'm going to start from the stage back to front of house and then back through your amps and to your speakers. So basically the first thing that comes in your signal chain is going to be a microphone or an input source. You need something to get a signal into your mixer. So what I use for a basic drum kit microphone is the CAD drum kit mic. It's a set of microphones. It actually gives you a kick, 2 overheads, a snare, and 3 tom mics. I got this on clearance for $100. Usually it's about $200. And starting with part of my audio philosophy as you go through, you'll look at, oh well, that's a cheap gear, cheap set of mics, or that's a cheap piece of rack gear. Basically, what I tried to do with this is build a simple budget system that works. If you're a guitar player, you know this, or any other instrument player, you know this. Buying a $2,000 Les Paul Custom doesn't make you Eddie Van Halen or Jimi Hendrix. But Jimi Hendrix could play a $100 PV and probably make it sound good. Audio is the same way. You can buy the best gear in the world, and if you don't know what you're doing, it can still sound like crap. But you can also buy cheap gear that works decently, and you can make it sound good if you know the proper way to do it and if you know what you're doing. Secondly on that is, most people that are watching this video, you're probably not going to be a professional. You're probably not making $2,000, $3,000 a gig setting up your whole rig, renting it out. You're probably only making a couple $100. Production companies do the same thing. They don't take their top quality gear for their cheapest price. Their cheapest price is going to be their lowest quality gear. So if you're only doing gigs that you're getting paid maybe $100, $200, maybe you're doing it for free for a buddy. There's no need to spend $10,000 on gear. If you're not going to make that money back in your equipment, then you probably shouldn't be buying that expensive of gear. So as I go through this video, you'll see the gear that I have. Everything works, it gets the job done, and I didn't spend $10,000 on a rig. So with that, that's the drum mics I use. Okay, next piece of gear I'll show you real quick while I was sitting here. This is a DI box. If you don't know what this is, it's also a direct box. You see some people call it direct inject box. There's all different sorts of name for it. DI is the basic standard term for it. And this is used for hooking in like bass guitars and keyboards and such. Something that might have a 1/4 inch output. And you need to get that to your microphone XLR plug into your Snake. This is how you do that. So I'll show you how to hook one of these up in the second half of the video. So right now I'll just show you kind of the gear that you might need to get. So next I also have a wireless mic. I've got one on a stand over here. So this is a wireless vocal mic. This is a Sennheiser. It's the EW100 G2. It uses the E835 capsule. I also have a wireless SM58. I just have this one out for display. The wireless, I keep my wireless receiver in the rack, and I'll show you how to hook that up once we go into it. Another mic option. This is the overhead condenser mic out of the CAD microphone kit, out of the drum kit. And this is a condenser mic, which is a different type of mic. You have basic dynamic mics and condenser mics are kind of your 2 basic types that you'll see in live. So a condenser mic uses what's called phantom power. If you don't know what phantom power is, you might have heard that term. What it actually is for is that these actually require a voltage to operate. Their diaphragm, where the sound actually picks up on these at the bottom here, uses a different type of pickup which requires a power. A phantom power is usually traditionally a 48 volt that comes down your mic line, and it's powered from your mixer, and it powers these microphones so they will work. Without phantom power they will not work. Down here is a dynamic mic, and this is what's called a large diaphragm mic. You see the size of this thing. This is for kick drum, or you could use it on bass guitar if you wanted to mic your bass guitar cab. As again, this is with the the kick drum mic that comes with the CAD microphone kit. It's the basic large diaphragm microphone. It works pretty decently, actually. It's not, anything like a Shure, Beta 52 or, maybe an AKG D112. But it works. As again, like I said, you don't always have to buy the most expensive gear for simple gigs. So that's kind of the microphone end. And then moving down the signal chain, you need to get microphones into your mixer. So the next thing we have, which would sit on your stage, is a snake box. So here's a basic snake box. This one I found used. Found a guy on Craigslist selling this thing. I believe I bought it for about $75. It was under $100. It's a 16 channel, has 4 returns on it, and it's a 50-foot snake. And this works pretty good for most bars and small pubs and stuff that I work with bands at. 50 feet is usually plenty enough length to get to my front of house position from the stage. So basically all your mics plug into here, and we'll actually connect that up later once we get it going and I do the second half. So from your snake on the other end, after all the coil of cable, it's going to end up on this end. So this is called the fan tail of a mixer. Basically they call it a fan tail because it fans out. This is where all your connectors come to from that stage box. And these are what go into your inputs of your mixer, and then your outputs will send to your returns, which we'll go over that when we hook them up. So basic front of house gear. You'll see here is just a basic Behringer mixer. This is the Xenix series. It's the 2222 FX. Basically this one has 8 microphone inputs, and then it goes up to 16 channels. 4 of these are stereos. So you can just kind of see a basic input list I have for this that I'll demonstrate with. And we have just the first 8 channels being used. It's the basic, small, like a 5-piece band. You have drums, then I'm going to use a kick snare, 2 overheads, bass player, 2 guitars, and 1 vocalist. So just kind of a standard band. Basically when buying mixers, you want to look at how many inputs you need. Well, I have this simple little one that I believe we got for $100 used. Like I said, I buy a lot of my gear cheap and used because, well, it works. If it works and it gets the job done, then, go for it. I can also rent bigger consoles. There's companies out there that rent them. So, if you're using one for your band and you're using it every weekend, then yeah, maybe you want to buy one that has enough microphone inputs for however many channels you want to use for vocals and your guitars and bass, and however many drum channels you want to run, and buy a mixer that suits you. Sometimes you can find places that rent them. There's music stores that'll rent them, for maybe $100, maybe less. We have a guy that we rent stuff from that we can get, 32 to 48 channel console for $25, $30, but that's because we have production contacts. Not everyone might have a deal like that. So this mixer works for small shows, and we do big shows, and we'll go out and we'll rent a big console for whatever we need. For my front of house rack, as I said, in this I'm not actually using any complicated outboard gear as far as like comps and gates. I'm showing you a very basic system and kind of the components you need to buy to use a basic setup. So everything's mounted in racks. I don't let any of my gear just bounce around loose. So we have a basic Furman power conditioner up here. This one I actually did buy brand new for about $120. It's got the voltage meter on it, which is pretty handy to have. Got a basic Behringer 31 band EQ. This is from my front of house mix, is what I use this guy for. So I run a stereo mix, a left and a right. So channel 1 is left, channel 2 is right. And I believe I got these used online for $50. And then for monitors, I'd like to get another 31 band. I just haven't spent the money yet. And like I said, I could spend another $50 and get another one. But for this simple rig, I have 2 monitor mixes set up, and works out pretty decently. And this is a Behringer Feedback Destroyer is actually what it is. I'll show you exactly how I use this to basically take the place of a 31 band EQ. I don't use this for like its intended purpose as being a automatic feedback detection in the middle of a mix, because I'll show you how to properly tune a system to word. This is pretty much pointless, other than you can get away with using it for a monitor mix to tune out your wedges and stuff, and that's basically what I used it for, because it does give you 12 separate filters, which is actually pretty powerful, because if you're cutting more than 12 filters on a 31 band, then you probably have some other problem, or maybe you need to look at getting a different wedge or different speakers. So we'll go over that in the third part of the video on how to actually tune it. So moving on down the chain, after our front of house gear, your outputs are going to go to your amp rack. So you travel back down your snake, and then I'll show you my amp rack, and I'll show you the front and the back. Okay, so starting at the top of the amp rack, we have a rack drawer. That's where we keep all of our extra adapter cables and stuff for like your XLR to 1/4 inch cables. Our DI box goes in here. We throw some mic clips in there sometimes. All of our different types of electrical tape and gaffer's tape and stuff. It's very handy to have a drawer. I definitely recommend getting one. Keeps your stuff a little more organized and central than trying to throw everything in duffel bags and things like that. Rack drawers are not that expensive. You can find them on eBay. Pretty cheap, 25, 30 bucks sometimes. And they're all different sizes of how many spaces you can get them in. I believe this is a 4-space rack drawer. Then on down we have another Furman power conditioner. And then we also have this American DJ switch, which we use for some smaller stuff. If we power, sometimes we'll run extra accessories off of this. So our amps are plugged into the top one right now. And I can pretty much get away with running most of my amps on one circuit right now. Because I don't draw more than 20 amps, even with the powerful rig that I have. I can actually run them together, and it's pretty good for bar situations when you don't have a whole lot of power available to have this big, huge, powerful system where you're needing a lot of multiple circuits. I've gotten away so far. If I got a 20 amp breaker, and my system will run loud enough for a small bar, getting up to around 110 dB, which is slamming for that small of a bar. I usually always have to turn it down because the owners don't like it that loud, and I can do that without blowing a breaker. So power is kind of one of those things. It's tricky when working in small venues, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that when I do some of the wiring stuff. Moving on down the rack. So your snake actually comes into this guy. So this powers all of your gear, of course. And then this is it's another Behringer unit. This is my crossover. It's the Super X Pro. This is actually a 2, 3, or 4-way crossover. Could do 2 and 3-way in stereo and 4-way in mono. I'm not using that many sets of amps for all my stuff. Nothing is bi-amped, and bi-amp basically means that your speakers are using separate amps for each driver. So you might have an amp for your highs, an amp for your mids, and then a sub amp. Mine are a passive crossover built into the speaker. So the lows, the mids, and highs are all coming off of that one input, and the crossover is inside the speaker. So I have an amp for my tops and then an amp for my subs. So basically I'm using this in 2-way mode. And so my left comes into channel 1, my right goes into channel 2. It's got a high output and a low output for the sub, and then you have a crossover point of where to set that frequency crossover at. And I'll go over that exactly on some crossover stuff whenever I show you the system tuning. So moving on down, so my outputs come out of the back of this. As I said, I'm using a high out and a low out. And basically those are going to this guy here, the Crown 602. I got this used for, I want to say, around 150 bucks. And I got the Crown 802. This is powering my subs on sale at Musician's Friend. Actually, I think they were clearancing these out when they brought out the new XLS series. And I bought that for 200 bucks brand new. It's one of the only other pieces of gear I actually bought brand new. So that's the amps, and then I will show you the back of the amp rack. Okay, so here's the back of the amp rack. Now mine is a little bit more extensive than kind of a basic rack. I did a video before kind of showing these insert and output panels for my auxes, my left, right, and subs hook in through this rack spacer here that has all the connectors on it, and my monitor's output out of this big one down here on the bottom. And you don't have to build something this extensive unless you want to really speed things up and make things as simple as possible. It takes some time to wire and do all of it, but it definitely helps on your setup time. But if you're just starting out and building a basic system, then you're basically just going to come from the back of that crossover, and you're going to have a high and a low output on the crossover. So depending on what model you have, it might have some different stuff. So a basic two-way system like mine is running. The highs left and right come right into these guys here. This is my left right for my tops. This is the Crown 602 right here. The 802 is on the bottom. This is powering my subs. Now there's a two lines running into this in the channel 1 and 2, but this is not actually running left and right. The crossover I have, the Behringer, has a summed mono output, and basically it takes channels 1 and 2 and sums them together into one output. And it still has two separate plugs, but it's combining the signal together for amps that don't have a summed mode on the amp itself. Some amplifiers will have a little switch on the back that you can actually sum the two output channels 1 and 2 together off of input 1, so you can just run one signal in. Subs traditionally don't run in stereo, they run in mono. And the reason is because subwoofers, when you get down to that like 80 hertz and 60 hertz, is what's called omnidirectional, which sub-frequencies you basically hear everywhere. You can't really tell exactly where they come from, unlike your tops where you have your stereo imaging and you have a left and a right, because those are more directional frequencies that you can hear kind of where they come from, and that's what gives you your pleasure of a stereo listening environment, is hearing those differences of the different sides of the room, and cymbals might be on the left and something else on the right, or a crash cymbal on one side and not on the other. But your sub-frequencies pretty much just fill the room, which is why they run in mono. There's no need to run them in stereo. Sometimes you can have alignment problems with phasing stuff being off in your subs by running them stereo, which means basically it's a big complicated thing when you get into polarity and phase. So if you take a whole audio class, you can learn that if you go to college, like I did. Like I say, we spent whole lessons on phase and stuff like that in polarity. But basically what it is if your subs aren't working together, then you can actually lose power. So if your subs are kind of out of alignment, where the left and right are not receiving the same signal at the same time, they'll be less powerful. So by running it mono and combining that left and right signal together, you get a more powerful hit on your subs, and it just makes them a little tighter sounding. So just run them in mono. Like I said, most crossovers will have some sort of summed output to where you can actually do that, or your amplifier, depending on what model you get, will do that, so you can sum them together. As far as my auxiliaries for my monitors, they come into this up top. It's the Crown PowerTech. And they actually come into the inputs up here on mine, which is these 1/4" plugs you see already plugged in down here. So you might just come off your stake and come directly into your amp if it has XLR or 1/4", whatever it has, and then your outputs are coming off of here. Now, yes, I do use Behringer rack gear because, like I said before, use a simple system, budget friendly, it works. I do particularly use Crown amplifiers because of amplifiers is something you don't want to escape on if you can afford to buy a better quality brand. One of the things about Crown is their power rating. When you're looking at amplifiers, they actually, they'll have it on the back usually. But the Crown is advertised in its actual constant power. So the 602 actually in 4 ohms, which is your standard load that you're going to run it in when you're running in stereo, like I am. Mine is running at 4 ohms per cab, and that is getting the 602 puts out 600 watts RMS power, or that's your constant, basically average power of continuous power. And the 802 puts out 800 watts at 4 ohms per channel. So I got 1600 here and 1200 here out of my tops. And some cheaper amps will advertise as being like a 2000 watt amp. And if you look at it and you read the stats on it, that's a momentary peak output, which means that the loudest part of a song, or the hardest hit of a snare drum, or a solid kick drum, or a bass drop, that amplifier will put out 2000 watts at a momentary output. You look down its RMS, which is its constant output, might only be like 300 watts. So Crown actually advertises the full constant output. So that's mainly where I go with Crown amps. There are some other name brand amps out there like EV and stuff. Your Electro Voice amps are very expensive, high-end amplifiers. Stuff like that will advertise, and the actual output wattage is what they will put. A peak wattage is kind of a pointless thing to know, other than what your speakers will handle before they actually can blow up, but you really don't hit your peak output that often, and that is not in a full frequency spectrum. A lot of times what they use is a 1 kilohertz sine wave, and they crank that as loud as they can and hit that with a wattage meter coming off the outputs, and it will say they measured 2,000 watts, and they'll put that as their maximum output power. So theoretically, you'll never really hit that in a real world situation. So you want the constant power RMS. So when looking for amplifiers, look at the RMS rating. So that's why I go with Crown amps, just because they do advertise in their actual output. So moving on, so out of your output of your amplifiers, it goes to the last thing in your signal chain, and this is your speakers, and that is what your audience hears. Okay, so getting into your speakers. So this is a category you have hundreds of options to go with, different types of speakers and different brands. And so you have a lot of options with here, and this is what a lot of people look at and don't know exactly what to get or what they need. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of different types of speakers. So your basic simplest system you could use, which many of you might have used before and maybe you're advancing to try to go with a bigger setup like this, would be just your basic powered speakers, which would take a XLR in, from directly out of your mixer to your snake and into that, and then they're self-powered and you don't have any other gear to go with them. Or you might have a powered mixer that has simple speakers that you put on speaker stands and will go up in the air, and you just have two, maybe 12-inch speakers. So with this system, you have a lot of options when you're using different amps with different cabs. So the cabs I have, and if you're on a budget, I highly recommend getting these. This top cab is a company called Seismic Audio. They're based out of Memphis, Tennessee. They sell a lot of different types of speaker cabs, from single 15s, single 10s, single 12s to dual 12s, dual 15s. This model is their dual 15 model. It's a 700 watt cab. It's got two 15s with the 1-inch titanium horn in it. And these things run about 700 watts a piece, and they are only $450 for the set. That is correct, two of them. If you look at like a JBL, JRX series, their dual 15 is about like $400 a speaker. So you can get two of these for $450. So if you're looking for a budget-friendly speaker, these are definitely something you could look at. And basically, when buying speakers, you just want to go with what size rig do you want to get. So, like I said, with my rig, I can actually run all this on one circuit. Usually without blowing it, as long as it's a strong enough breaker, like a 20 amp breaker. My total system is around 2400 watts with the tops and the subs together. And that'll fill a decent sized room, like a bar, a pub, even hotel ballrooms with plenty enough sound. I can get it up to like 110 dB SPL, which is way more loud than you ever need in like a restaurant type bar situation where a lot of bands play out, because managers and owners of the places usually don't want it that loud. So 2400 watts is quite a bit of sound. So you might just need a single 12, a single 15. So it's just how much power do you want and how big of a room are you filling. So it's always better to have more headroom and more capabilities than what you need, because you can always turn it down. But if you go weak on your power and maybe you play an outdoor show, you might not have enough power. So this rig here, we can do outdoor shows, and we've even measured at about 75 to 80 feet back and still reaching like around 95 dB SPL, which is still a pretty comfortable listening environment. It's still pretty decently loud for a PA. So the subs, I actually built these subs, and I did one of my first videos I did was on the construction of these. I did a 5-part series on how to build a Dual 18 cab. If you look at buying one of these, you're probably going to spend about $600 a cab for a Dual 18, like JBL and Yamaha make it in your consumer series. So once you get up into your pro series, Dual 18s is pretty much all you're going to find in the big pro gear, because they're they're filling big giant venues and stuff. But for consumer grade products, most of them are going to be like a single 18, but I just wanted to have nice lots of low end power. So I just built dual 18 cabs because I could. The drivers in these actually came from the same company, Seismic Audio. They build all their speakers with their same drivers in them, and you could buy the drivers raw. So they actually only designed a single 18 with that driver in it. So I decided just to buy their drivers, and then I built a dual 18 cab. So kind of the system upgrade of what most people will run with is just a basic top, is that using that crossover in the rack, and we'll go over that of actually kind of how to use that. The purpose of dividing your system up is you get a more powerful, usually cleaner and better quality sound by dividing it up. So basically your sub is taking all that low frequency range and it's taking care of that, while above that set crossover point, which I'll show you on the actual crossover how to kind of dial in, above that point, this is what your top takes in. So the more you can divide your frequency range up between drivers, the cleaner and more quality sound you can have, because the driver's not having to reproduce the entire frequency range. So in this you got sub. This one, like I said, it has a crossover built into the speaker, which most speakers will, unless they're a bi-amped model speaker. This one actually does a low, a mid, and a high in the top that's all built into it just by one speaker cable in the back. Some might just have a single 15, so then you have a low and a high. So basically, the more speakers you can divide up the frequency spectrum over, the cleaner and more quality sound you can get, because each speaker only has to handle a certain range of the frequency spectrum. So it's definitely important to get subs if you really want that low, rich bass guitar. You want thumpy, punchy kick drum that you want to be able to feel that bottom end. It's not necessarily always to make it louder, but it gives you a fuller sound. And if you listen to a system with just tops and then you add it, even one sub can make a big difference, and you get that nice, full, professional sound. So that's pretty much it for the speakers. I'll show you some different types of speaker cabling when we start hooking some stuff up and we do the wiring. I'll go over options on connectors, and different speakers are going to have different types of input jacks on them. But basically everything I've shown so far is kind of the raw, bare bones equipment that you need, from the rack gear I showed over here and to the front of house stuff. It's a basic system from microphone to mixer and out to your speakers is what you need to get a system of this size. And like I said, I'm not gonna show like compressors and gates and outboard effects gear. That gets more advanced, and like I said, you could take a whole year of audio and still not learn all that. My program was a 2-year program of learning all the ins and outs and extra stuff, and you can take whole classes and lessons just on using a compressor and using a gate. So I don't want to get too complicated with this video, so I'm just going to show you the bare bones of the parts you kind of need to buy and what to look at. And this system here I built over the course of about a year. It takes a little while to build it up unless you got a lot of money laying around. Roughly $2,000 probably, I would say, if I added everything up. Like I said, used a lot of used gear, look on eBay, Craigslist, and try to find those bargains out there, because they do exist.